Hi, Pia.
Hi, Lane. How are you?
I'm good. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Roma to Sonoma, where we explore the rich history and the vibrant future of two iconic wine regions, Italy and California. I'm Lane, and I'm a wine journalist from Sonoma, California.
And my name is Pia, and I'm a sommelier here in Rome, Italy. And today we have a very exciting episode about wine and scandals, scandals throughout the ages of the wine industry. And Lane, I know you and I have talked about this a lot because there have been significant scandals, I think, obviously in the US, but also in different places in Europe. And I know we're not going to be able to cover all of them today. But I think it would be really interesting to start with one that's a little bit sort of historical. And so I think you're going to speak to us a little bit about the one in about the scandals that around the Prohibition time in the US, right?
Yeah. I think Prohibition is so iconic. And I mean, it kind of makes me smile, to be honest, because it's such a crazy time that this ever happened. And the whole world knows about this. I mean, what country of millions of people all of a sudden makes it illegal to buy or sell wine? I mean, that is insane. It really is insane. So this period lasted for 13 years. I can't even
That's
believe that.
unbelievable. What year did it start?
It started in 1919, the year my grandmother was born, and
Oh.
and the year that women got the right to vote, as a matter of fact. Because yeah, and then it ended in 1933. So it also kind of coincided with the Depression, which so
Yeah.
there's a double whammy there, which is why people were really trying to, if they did have wine, they were trying to sell it because people were just trying to survive. But there were some exemptions, and that's where it's a lot of people don't know about these little pieces. So there was an exemption for church wine. So there
Okay.
was like a famous winery in Napa that was able to maintain itself and survive through the Prohibition because they were the first distributor to the Catholic Church, and that was Beaulieu. How
Oh,
do you say
wow.
B-E-A-U? Yeah, yeah. So they were able to produce and sell wine throughout. In fact, they sold four times more than they were selling before. So you know that
So
that didn't all go
cool.
to the church, right?
No,
But
no, no,
they were
no.
exempted from making it. Now, the other crazy fact here is that at the beginning, I think Napa became really popular in the 70s and 80s, so people don't really understand pre-prohibition what was going on here. But there was a vibrant wine making community here, mainly of immigrants,
Yeah,
mainly of
yeah, yeah. That makes
Italians,
sense,
French,
right?
and yeah. And there were 400 wineries when Prohibition started. And by the end, there were 40. I mean, yeah, I think that's right. 400. Yeah, 440. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. And that's why there were so many ghost wineries for so long, these beautiful, magnificent, like chateaus and, beautiful villas that used to be wineries that just sat vacant for decades until people started,
Incredible.
it started coming back. Um, and then another exemption was for home wine. So that's where you
Okay.
get into what's kind of the wine equivalent of moonshine, where people were making wine in their own house. And it was supposedly for like home use. So you could make it for yourself if you had vineyards, whatever. But they were, of course, selling it. And people had like trap doors and hidden walls and ways that they were just like, you know, there was one I read that was it's still a winery today. They became a hotel. So they became a hotel and people would come and stay there. And then they had a trap door with a speakeasy underneath where people were buying their wine and,
Ah,
like hanging out.
so
So
interesting.
that was a way to get around it. And there was another, what was the other exemption I'm thinking of? Well, you could still sell grapes. So one winery very famously, again, this is one of the oldest wineries in Napa. It's called Beringer. And they would sell like grape bricks and basically put a label on it saying, do not add this to a gallon of water and put it in a cupboard for 20 days because it will turn into wine. And somehow they got away with that. Somehow they got away with that. So there are just a
That's
lot of cute
so
stories.
funny.
even though it's scandalous, I mean, to be quite honest, a lot of people did go to jail, during Prohibition. So we can joke about it. It's probably the lightest of our scandals for sure. But it
Yeah.
also is, I don't know what we learned from that, but I think we probably learned, well, to be ingenious, and we got speakeasies, which is a really cool thing. But also just don't try to maybe prohibit people from doing something that they're going to do anyway. Not
Yeah.
an entire,
And all you do is fuel an illegal industry.
oh, it became so much more exciting then, I'm sure, to be able to have a cocktail. So yeah, so that's prohibition. So that's kind of like I would say, most our oldest kind of scandal around wine. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of, yeah, it's one of the ones that sort of historically I feel like starts off what is it, the 20th
Criminality.
century.
Yeah, criminality around
Yeah,
wine.
criminality around it. So in Italy, there was a really big scandal, but it was really basically like a massive public health scandal and scare, uh, because it was in the 1980s, and basically in about 1986, I think it was 1986, basically, there were people reported who had either, nerve damage or had lost their sight. And the authorities really quickly figured out that there was methanol in that had been added, like really like large doses of methanol added to very cheap wines coming from the Piedmont area. And initially, the victims were only in that kind of area around there, but actually, there started being more and more in different areas around Italy. And what they figured out, but this was after a really long time and after this scandal had gone sort of, global. I mean, they had to stop production. There were European countries that asked for it to, stop imports of Italian wines, was that basically it was a group of producers in Piedmont who previously had been involved in kind of wine, what's the word in English for it? Wine, ensure that the wine met the minimum requirements and the minimum alcohol requirements to be considered wine. They would add sugar to it, right? So it was places that previously, like wine growers and producers who previously had used sugar, that at the same time in the early 1980s, I think it was 1984, methanol had been declassified as an alcohol and so was no longer subject to tax or to tariffs. So the cost of methanol plummeted. And so they were like, this is a super cheap way to get alcohol content up in wines. And basically, like if you have a teeny tiny bit, and here I can't go into quantities because I would say something that's wrong, but if you can put teeny tiny quantities into like a massive amount of wine, volume of wine, it's one thing. But what they found was across the production line of cheap wines, everyone was adding a bit of methanol. And so by the
Oh,
time it got onto the market, yeah, no, I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean,
oh
some
yeah.
of the,
What is that? The chain,
yeah, the supply chain. So basically,
yeah,
they got
supply
to the
chain.
point where basically, once it hit the market, it had like 30% methanol. I mean, quantities that will kill you. They are fatal. And in fact, I think in total, the number of recorded deaths was 23.
Oh
And
my
no,
God.
no, I mean, it was huge. And the amount of people who kind of suffered from it, either blindness or anything like that, was around 90. But actually, the chances are that it was much higher because they only the only reason that they identified it as a problem is because it was very young people coming in with what they thought was like suspected heart attacks, this, that, on the other. But once they were coming in all in one go, they were like, there's something wrong here. But there were people maybe a year or two before who people just, thought had died of natural causes when actually, and they didn't exhume, they exhumed one or two bodies, but they didn't do a massive effort in that regard. And so we'll never actually know the true
Did people
figures.
go to jail for this? Were people like
So they
arrested,
did. So there's
fined?
this not as many as you would hope. And the worst thing about it was, and it's really interesting, there's actually a very interesting podcast, Italian podcast about this, that sort of followed the case. which took years and years. You know, the criminal justice system is notoriously slow in Italy, but none of the victims got compensation.
Oh
None of
my
them.
God.
So,
Well,
you
that's
know,
why they
I
didn't
mean,
want to exhume either. Can you imagine
well, I
how
mean,
many
that's the
people, how
thing. But I
many?
mean, so interestingly enough, though, the case, I mean, they were supposed to pay, you know, the case had, but they just didn't end up doing it, right? They just didn't end up seeing any money or getting paid. So yeah, it was a really dark time for
That's horrible.
yeah,
Oh,
it
that's a
was.
horrible story.
But you know, one of
Wow.
the things that happened, and I think it's important, and you know, maybe we'll talk about this in a bit, was that it gave a really important shift to Italian winemaking generally. Just made it far, you know, the all the regulations around wine became much more strict. They created, you know, specialized bodies in charge of checking the quality of wines. You know, the whole
While it's being
system.
made
Yeah.
and yeah.
Exactly, the whole system became far more reliable. And that's not
I
saying
just
still the scandals afterwards, but it certainly cleaned up the system.
made everything more just put a check on things
Yeah,
because I know when
exactly.
I was at a winery in Puglia last summer and they were telling me they were explaining these kind of checks that are done at the wineries and I've then since spoken to other producers in Italy and they're like well it's to yes it is very strict but that's more strict than what it is here and this winery was telling me that it's worse in the south that they're very hard on the southern like wineries and they're like they just show up at any time they don't give you any warning and they can just
No.
go check everything and they're like but it happens like once a month and then I guess in other places it's not that common that it happens that much but that really goes to show how they're very 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 on it
Yes,
seemingly now
absolutely.
which yeah
Absolutely.
means you're going to lose your entire industry if you don't get on it right
No,
so you have that
exactly.
bad reputation after that it's kind of like what was happening in wasn't Spain like a bunch of bulk wine being sold into Bordeaux to do like
Yeah,
mixed
yeah,
things
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
was
And so they were basically like, I guess, contaminating their blends. They were just deviating from what, you know, is prescribed by the appellation. And yeah, it's basically the same thing that they've done, you know, there's a similar issue in Italy in 2008 with the Brunello scandal, right? So instead of having 100% Sangiovese, there were some producers who were cutting their wines with Merlot and with other international or even cheap local grapes. And you're not allowed to do it according to the regulation. And they got found out. And then, you know, obviously these things, it's like opening Pandora's box. All of a sudden it was like, it wasn't, you know, just one or two. It was like the consortium.
it was just done it was a
Yeah,
thing that was
exactly.
done well I know in the one in Spain selling to Bordeaux people went to prison and there were big fines but there was
Yeah.
also a backlash as I recall, because it wasn't like the heads of the operation. It was kind of like the workers that drove the fruit or, you know, that kind of thing. It was the lower level people that really got hammered and they never went to like find the top people. So that's a little bit sad. But I mean, then it does put more emphasis on paying attention to exactly what's in every single, you know, blend that is being put out
Yeah.
there because it would be really easy to fudge that. It would be really easy. Um, and then I think this is probably when people think of wine scandals, it's probably one that they think of first because there was a movie made about it. And I think it just came out in the last few years called Sour Grapes. And it's about
Yeah.
it's about a guy who I found out later, he's from Indonesia, Rudy Kunia Kuniawan, I think is what it is.
Hmm.
And he came to the States to go to university, and then he just stayed. He didn't have, he tried to get asylum, they couldn't get asylum, but ended up staying. Somehow he got into this. I mean, he had to learn a lot about wine to be able to pass himself off as a real wine connoisseur. And he was at one point buying and selling like millions of dollars worth of wine per month. So
It's unbelievable.
he was buying like the most expensive wines in the world at auction and then reselling these wines. And what people didn't realize is that what he was also doing was at home taking some of these bottles and some of these labels, and he would reproduce them and make his own, and then he would get cheaper, like much, much cheaper wines. Mainly, he was focused on Napa and Burgundy. He would get wines from those regions, and then he would put that in the bottles and then sell it. He would sell it as if it were like a 1950 Chateau Latour or whatever, And so he was very wealthy. He was very famous. People knew who he was, and he he messed up several times. I can't remember. I feel like I saw that movie, but I can't remember if they showed this then. I always felt like there was one major screw up
Yeah, that's what I
of
thought as well.
yeah, like he put a different vintage or a vintage that never
Yeah, he put the
existed
wrong
or something.
vintage.
Yeah,
Like in
he
a year that they didn't have a vintage, something like that, right?
and they saw it and the winery saw it and but there were several things that happened. So another time there was, I think it was at the time, one of the most expensive wine lots sold in the world. And Christie's auction house put a photo of the wines on like the cover of their guide. And that winery from Burgundy contacted them and said, those are fake. Those are not our wines. And so they just kind of like took them off. They didn't file any charge, no charges filed or anything. And Rudy was questioned about it. And his answer was, well, we do the best that we can, but it's Burgundy. Like it's Burgundy, what can we do? Kind of like they're so criminal there or something. And so like it got let off of it. People didn't really pursue it apparently. And then he did something else that was like the vintage thing and something else, and he was caught a couple of times. And then eventually the one that brought him down was the Koch brothers in the States. One of them is I think Bill is a big wine collector. And he bought from Rudy what he thought was a lot of, I don't know, a case or cases of wines that were found in Paris that were Thomas Jefferson's wines. And it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, it's almost crazy to even think that he bought it. But, I mean, at this time, Rudy was still seen as like a top guy. And so
Yeah,
he
and also in the industry, he had his cachet, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then so he bought them, and at some point he went to get them appraised and was told that this did not exist. This wine did not exist. And so he's the one who brought criminal charges against Rudy, and Rudy was convicted. He was the first and I believe only wine fraudster ever convicted in the States. And he went to prison for like 10 years and then he was deported to Indonesia. So he must be deported recently because I saw something where it was like in 2020 he was still in
yeah,
jail.
yeah.
But
I
then
saw something recently about him in on BBC. I'm sure I did. That's so interesting.
so yeah, case scandaloso.
Yeah. So what do these things teach us, Lane? What do these things have in common?
Well, I would say with the methanol and the bulk wine going into wines and with the counterfeiting, they put a lot of controls around that. So I mean that became something that everyone became aware of the possibility for this because when you buy wines at that level, you're not drinking them right away. So you're really buying on faith. You're buying on faith anyway, that the wine is going to taste good when you open it. You can open one and try it, but you don't really know. This put some controls on the production and sort of um, put controls sort of like what you had in fashion, like on some of these 10, $20,000 bags, where they have inside kind of secret codes or holograms or ways that only that producer can tell you if it's real or not, that authenticates the wine.
Yeah.
And so they've implemented a lot of those things. And I think with like that's what we were saying in Italy and in Europe, kind of the European scandals, they're monitoring it.
Yeah.
That's something
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
being watched a lot more closely and being checked. So, all of these things turn out into the silver lining, which is making the industry like better and more more closely watched so that these things don't happen. And we're talking in your case with people died, who died.
No, I know.
And in Rudy's case, as far as we know, no one died, but people lost millions of dollars. So
Yeah.
I actually read that they estimate there are probably like 10,000 bottles of what he has faked and, fake wine, counterfeit wines that he sold in cellars around the world. 10,000
No
bottles.
way.
Come here, boo. And come here. Oh, he prefers to bark.
Oh my goodness. No, I didn't realize it was so many.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty shocking. I mean, because I don't know how they know that, but somehow they've tracked that. I guess if these bottles
I
were
mean, I
fake,
guess
then
he
probably
must
the
have had
rest.
books, right? He must have kept a
Uh,
record and maybe it's going through those, but that's incredible.
he was
Wow.
moving a lot of money, a lot of money. So anyway, that's the scandals, wine scandals. I'm sure there are more. We'll probably have to do a part deux because there's a lot out there, but these are good ones. The only fun one is Prohibition. So,
Absolutely.
well, thanks,
Okay.
Pia, and thanks everyone. And if you have questions, you have scandals you'd like us to cover, let us know.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.